Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Mealstounalivefor, where we talk about a true crime case and I make a death row meal from scratch. I'm your host, Jody Breton, and if you like my content, please like, subscribe, find me on Spotify, YouTube, all the things. So today we're talking about the infamous serial unaliver William Bonin. I'm sure that you've heard of him. He's been covered quite a few times, but we know him as the Freeway Unaliver. Listen, I know that we're already talking about people being unalived, but just be forewarned, we're talking about the unaliving of children and young boys. So if this is too much for you, I understand. Feel free to turn this episode off, and I will see you on the next one. Let's talk about William Bonin's early life. He was born January 8th, 1947, in Wilmantic, Connecticut. Hopefully I'm saying that right. William was born into a tumultuous family, to say the least. Unfortunately, both of his parents were alcoholics. William's father, Leonard, had served in World War II, and they had said that once he had come back, he really just didn't feel the same, and that kind of led to his drinking problems. And after years of abuse, Alice, his mother, also turned to alcoholism. In January 1950, William's father was a compulsive gambler and gambled away their home in Andover, Connecticut, forcing the family to reside with William's maternal grandmother in Wilmantic. William and his brothers were actively raised Catholic and baptized according to the church doctrine. In September 1953, William and his older brother, Robert Jr., were placed in an orphanage school. The convent enforced harsh discipline by staff, with extreme assault being commonplace. William recalled nuns forcing him to punch a fence when he misbehaved. To make matters worse, William was continually sexually assaulted by other boys at the convent, as well as a Catholic priest who temporarily stayed there. During this time at the orphanage, neither parent visited William or his brother, and he actually started to worry that his parents had passed away. William was to remain at the orphanage until May 1955, when he returned to live with his parents in a home owned by William's maternal grandfather in Mansfield. When the boys moved back to Mansfield, it was not a good change. The boys attended Annie Elementary with his younger brother, Paul, where he was ridiculed as Bugsy Bonin. Neighbors also noticed how the Bonin parents really neglected the boys, so they took pity on them often, giving the children time, attention, food, and even clothing. And to make matters even worse, William ended up being left with his maternal grandfather, who was a convicted child molester. He had reportedly abused his mother, and she knew that. His mother also said that she suspected his father, Leonard, of also abusing all of the children in a sexual manner. As a result of all this abuse, William stole hubcaps, license plates, metal tags off of vehicles around town, and as a result, in 1957, he was placed in a juvenile detention center for these and other petty crimes. And keep in mind, William is only 10 years old at this point. While incarcerated, William was again molested by an adult counselor. Following his release, he began to essay his younger brother. After 6 months, however, Paul did inform their mother of William's fondling, so they were forced to sleep in separate bedrooms. It was said that Alice knew that William tried to molest or essay other boys in the neighborhood, but simply brushed it under the rug or made excuses for her son. In the late 1960s, the family faced the prospect of foreclosure, and William's mother kicked their father out of the home when in custody of all of the boys. Since the family was facing financial hardship, the family decided to move to Downey, California. In early 1962, they purchased a home near Torrance, Very soon after they moved to California, his father had a stroke and passed away. Eventually, William would end up dropping out of high school in 1966. After this, William was said to lack motivation and was frequently borrowing money from his parents, so he decided to join the United States Air Force. William became engaged to Linda, a decision largely determined by William's mother. According to him, she felt that it would keen his attraction to pubescent boys, but as we know, that didn't really happen. William even confessed to Linda during their engagement that he had reoccurring nightmares about SA and the murder of young women and boys. During William's military service, he completed a General Equivalency Diploma, or a GED, and served as a cook for 4 months in Alaska. He was arrested for theft in October 25, 1967, but the charges were dropped to his imminent deployment to Vietnam. William had 5 months of active duty in the 205th Assault Support Helicopter Unit as an aerial gunner, logging over 700 hours of combat and patrol time. William would go on to say that during his time in Vietnam, he realized how insignificant human life was and had said that this helped him get over the fear of unaliving people or having sympathy for others. Despite this, he is known to have risked his own life on one occasion while under enemy fire to save a wounded fellow airman. For this act, William received a medal in recognition for his gallantry, among other medals and awards. Later on, William would admit to essaying 2 soldiers under his command at gunpoint. He would serve nearly 3 years before receiving an honorable discharge in October 25, 1968, at age 21. After returning home, he discovered that Linda, who had given birth to their son, had left him to marry another man. Apparently, he was very frustrated with the situation and ended up working as a gas station attendant. Soon after returning from Vietnam, that's when William would really start his first convictions. On November 17, 1968, William picked up 14-year-old Billy Jones in Acadia, California, while driving his mother's car. William offered to take him home, but Jones attempted to flee the vehicle in response to William's repeated questions regarding his sexuality. Driving him to a nearby shopping center, William handcuffed and essayed him, knocking him unconscious in the process. He then dropped Jones off at a park. Returning home, Jones's mother promptly reported William to the police. A little over a week later, on November 26, William picked up 17-year-old hitchhiker John Treadwell of Torrance. William began asking him about homosexuality before accelerating the vehicle and producing a handgun. William parked in a secluded area, then essayed Treadwell and bludgeoned him with a tire iron. William threatened that he had friends who would aid in avenging him if Treadwell told the man of what had happened. On December 4th, it was reported to Torrance Police Department by 17-year-old Alan Pruitt that a man with medium-length dark hair and olive complexion had offered him a ride before deviating from the highway and handcuffing the boy who was extensively essayed in the vehicle. On January 1st, 1969, William offered a ride to 12-year-old Lawrence Bretman in Hermosa Beach. Ignoring the boy's pleas to let him go, William began threatening Bretman. He parked and essayed Bretman and robbed him at gunpoint. He then threatened to kill Bretman if he reported the incident. On January 12th, William reportedly picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Jesus Mong, asking him about homosexuality before offering him $20 for oral copulation. When Mong attempted to exit the vehicle, Bonin physically and sexually assaulted him. He was then handcuffed and assaulted again. William threatened Mong, stating, "I'll rip your nuts off if you don't cool it." By this point, extensive efforts were being made by local police to locate a potential serial rapist that fit William's description. On the 28th, an El Segundo policewoman confronted William, who had friends 16-year-old runaway Timothy Wilson, who was present with William and William's mother's vehicle. Noting William's frantic state and similar profile to the rapist, she searched and handcuffed him. William reportedly advised her to incarcerate him before insisting he was not responsible for his actions. He was indicted on 5 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of sodomy, 1 count of oral copulation, and 1 count of child molestation against 5 individuals that he had abducted and assaulted. In March, William underwent 2 psychiatric examinations, after which he was determined as being a sexual psychopath who had little control over his impulses and showed signs of depression and inappropriate emotional responses. William arrived at the Atascadero State Hospital on June 17, 1969. He was subjected to a battery of physical and psychiatric examinations, which revealed that he possessed an IQ of 121 and displayed traits of manic depression, sexual sadism disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. During the physical examination, it revealed extensive scars on William's head and buttocks, which he had claimed to have no memory of obtaining, but was likely sustained in the orphanage. This lack of knowledge led experts to conclude that William repressed memories of the more extreme aspects of his childhood abuse. They also noted that the psychological and emotional implications of William's unhealthy relationship with his mother, upon whom he remained emotionally dependent in spite of her low opinion of him. In 1971, William was sent to the California Medical Facility, having been declared unsuitable for further treatment due to repeated sexual engagement with inmates. Eventually, he was released from prison on June 11, 1974, after doctors concluded that he was no longer a danger to society. William would start a job with a dependable drive-away trucking company in December 1974, but was fired from the job in February 1975 for wrecking a trailer. Assuming that it was due to the stress, William would start cruising for young boys again, and on the night of September 8, 1975, he encountered 14-year-old David Allen McVicker hitchhiking in Garden Grove. McVicker accepted William's offer to drive him and again started asking him about his homosexuality. McVicker replied that he had not and was not attracted to men. He asked to leave the vehicle, which prompted William to accelerate it. When McVicker attempted to leave, William produced a gun and drove him to a deserted field. William ordered him to undress and then beat and sexually assaulted him. Bonin strangled him with his t-shirt and tire iron. McVicker pleaded for his life, and William immediately stopped and apologizing before casually saying, "You know what? You're an all right guy. I was going to unalive you, but I want to come back for you and use you again." William then dropped off McVicker, who phoned his mother and promptly informed Garden Grove police of the incident. On October 11, 1975, William was arrested for 2 assaults months later. Upon arrest, he informed law enforcement that next time there won't be any more witnesses. He was charged with the sexual assault and forcible oral copulation of a minor and attempted abduction of a 15-year-old boy 2 days later. William propositioned the 15-year-old boy for sexual favors for $35. When the boy said no, William attempted to run him over with his truck on the sidewalk. On December 31st, 1975, William pled guilty to both of these charges, but would be let out less than a year later by October 11th. On November 1st, 1978, William moved into an apartment in the Kingswood Village complex, located approximately 1 mile from his parents' house. He became acquainted with 43-year-old neighbor Everett Scott Frazier. He became a regular attendee at Frazier's party, where young men, drugs, and alcohol were rife. Frazier considered him a respectful, placid individual and frequently introduced William to his young male acquaintances. The following month, William established a relationship with a married mother who held a criminal record for child cruelty. He would take trips to Anaheim with her and her children. Through his frequent attendance at Frazier's party, William became acquainted with 21-year-old Vernon Robert Butts and 18-year-old Gregory Matthew Miley. So just to be clear, I'm going to mention different accomplices that William Bonin had during his reign of terror. So in total, he had 4 different accomplices. The one that was most prevalent would be Vernon Butts, but he had 2 more after this, and I'll try my best to distinguish who was who. Vernon Butts was also known to have a traumatic childhood. His father died when he was 9, and his mother had a series of unsuccessful relationships. He was known to be very eccentric and had a part-time job as a porcelain maker and was also a part-time magician. Now, George Miley, who would be another accomplice of William, was an illiterate Texas native and a high school dropout with an IQ of 56. So it's safe to say that Miley was easily influenced by William Bonin, among other people. Both Vernon Butts and Gregory Miley would be a lover to William Bonin as well, so there was also a physical relationship going on between them. William Bonin's very first murder that he would be convicted of would be in May 1979. And it seemed like William preferred to have somebody as an accomplice always. It seemed like he liked to have someone watch him do the depraved things that he enjoyed. So for this first murder, Vernon Butts accompanied him. 13-year-old Thomas Glenn Lundgren was last seen leaving his parents' house in Reseda on May 28, 1979. Shortly before his abduction, Lundgren had reportedly told friends a man had offered to meet him at a skate park to take photos of him skateboarding for a magazine. His partially clothed body was found the same afternoon in Agora. His clothes and severed genitals were discovered in a nearby field. An autopsy revealed that he had suffered emasculation and extensive bludgeoning. In addition, he had been slashed across the throat, stabbed, and strangled. An expert had said that this was Bonin's attempt to silence his homosexual attraction to young boys. On August 4th, 1979, William drove from Silverado Canyon to Westminster to spend time with Vernon. He soon suggested that they find another teenager. The 2 men found another hitchhiker, a 17-year-old boy named Mark Shelton, near Beach Boulevard. William offered $400 for sexual services, and according to William, he accepted. He drove them to Cajun Pass in San Bernardino County as things got more aggressive and they began to violate Shelton. They were so violent in their assault that Shelton entered a state of shock, which proved fatal. His body was discarded at a gravel road in Cajun Pass. The very next day, the men encountered 17-year-old West German student Marcus Grabs. Grabs attempted to hitchhike from the Pacific Coast Highway. According to William, he engaged in consensual relations with the youth, who agreed to be bound with a length of cord and ignition wire. William retrieved a knife and intimidated Grabs as Vernon drove towards William's home. There again, Grabs was sexually assaulted and beaten, and Grabs reportedly broke loose and punched William. This caused William to strangle him and stab him 77 times. His body was discovered in Malibu Creek the following day. On August 9th, William again was detained for molesting a 17-year-old boy from Dana Point. This was a violation of his parole conditions and should have resulted in William being returned to prison at Orange County. However, an administrative error committed prior to William's scheduled court date resulted in his release. On his way home after that release, he had said, "No one's going to testify again. This is never going to happen to me again." On August 20th, William picked up 18-year-old Robert Ryrostek in Newport Beach. William allegedly coaxed him to perform oral by offering him $50. At knife point, William bound and essayed him, and then drove to Vernon's residence. On the drive, Vernon performed oral on Ryrostek before striking him and taking William's place as driver. William then tortured Ryrostek by bending his fingers and essaying him, then finally bludgeoning him to death and strangling him. His body was found on September 27th along Interstate 10. On August 27th, William and Vernon abducted 15-year-old Hollywood boy Donald Ray Hayden on Santa Monica Boulevard. Vernon was driving the van and William offered $50 for intimacy. When Vernon made an accidental wrong turn, Hayden became frantic, causing William to beat, bind, torture, and sodomize him. William then strangled him to death. The two men continued to abuse his body after death before dumping his body at a construction site near Ventura Freeway. It was discovered hours later. It was almost the identical story on September 9th when the men encountered 17-year-old David Luis Moreno cycling. Again, he entered the van, they offered money for intimacy, and then they assaulted him and dumped his body on Highway 101 on the 12th. William's next victim would be a unidentified young man with brown hair whom William claimed to be 5 foot 6 inches tall and about 18 years old on November 1st. The two men assaulted him, strangled him to death before inserting an ice pick into his head. His body was discarded around State Route 99 south of Bakersfield. On November 30th, an unassisted William abducted 17-year-old Frank Dennis Fox from Bellflower. William sodomized him and strangled him until he died. His body was found 2 days later alongside the Ortega Highway 5 miles east of San Juan Capistrano. The body bore signs of binding and blunt force trauma. 10 days later, a 15-year-old boy from Long Beach, John Frederick Kilpatrick, left his home and was offered money for intimacy by William. After engaging in mutual consensual oral copulation, Kilpatrick was bound and essayed by William before being transported to his parents' house, where he was flogged with string and then strangled to death. His body was discarded near Rialto. It was found on December 13th, but Kilpatrick was remain unknown as John Doe until August 5th, 1980 because of his troubled background. On the evening of February 3rd, William and Gregory Miley went to Hollywood with the specific intention of finding another teenage boy. They encountered 15-year-old Charles Miranda nearby the Starwood nightclub along Santa Monica Boulevard. According to Miley, William and Miranda had consensual intimacy in the van as he drove. William then told Miley that Miranda was going to die. Miley asked William why he would not just let him go, and William replied, "Because he'll know it's us and know the van." They began to assault Miranda, and eventually they beat him to death. Soon after, his body was dumped in a Los Angeles alleyway. 5 minutes after discarding the body, William suggested to Miley to do another one. Miley initially protested and stated he wanted to go home, but eventually complied. A few hours later, in Huntington Beach, the pair encountered 12-year-old James Maccabee. Maccabee had been dropped off at a corner bus stop by his older brother, who had given him money to take the bus to Disneyland. He was lured into William's van on the promise that he would drive him there. According to Miley, Maccabee got into the van and William drove to a grocery store. William parked the van and began hugging and kissing Maccabee before binding him and telling him that he was being kidnapped for ransom. Soon after, William began punching him, and as Miley drove, William began to assault him and bludgeon him with a tire iron. Eventually, William forced him to sleep in his arms, after which he was strangled to death. Miley and William discarded the corpse at the construction site in Walnut, and his body was found 3 days later. The very next day, William was arrested for violating conditions of his parole, and he was remanded in custody at Orange County Jail until March 4th. Soon after his release, on March 14th, William abducted 18-year-old Ronald Gatlin. William again beat, sodomized, and hacked him with an ice pick. The following day, his body was found behind an industrial building. On March 21st, William offered a ride to 14-year-old hitchhiker Glenn Norman Baker. Baker was beaten, essayed with objects, then strangled with a ligature and burned with a cigarette. Later that same very day, 15-year-old Russell Dwan Rowe was abducted in Garden Grove. Again, he was bound, beaten, strangled to death, and after an estimated 8 hours of captivity, both boys were discarded in Cleveland National Forest close to Ortega Highway and found on the 23rd. And as you can see, William gets more and more active and depraved as time goes on, killing multiple people in the same day and having more and more violent acts on these poor young boys. One Friday evening in March, William offered 17-year-old William Ray Paw a ride home as the pair left Frazier's residence. Just as a reminder, Frazier was the neighbor who had multiple parties where he also met Gregory Miley and Vernon Butts. So that was the neighbor that used to frequent parties. Pa accepted, and during the ride, William asked him to have sex. According to Pa, he attempted to leave the van once William had slowed down at a stoplight. William grabbed him, dragged him back inside, and admitted that he enjoyed abducting, restraining, and strangling hitchhikers. William then informed Pa how to murder without getting caught. William said that he had chosen to refrain from essaying and murdering Pa not out of sentiment, but because the pair had been seen leaving Frazier's party together. Pa was driven to what he claimed was his home, and when the van left, he ran to his house. But Pa kept associating with William. On March 25th, he would become William's third accomplice. The two abducted 15-year-old runaway Harry Todd Turner from Los Angeles Street. Turner had escaped a boys' home in Lancaster 4 days prior. Pa later testified that he and William lured Turner, that's a really hard one for me to say, into William's van with an offer of $20 for intimacy. After binding and sodomizing Turner, William again started torturing and then ordered Pa to beat him up. William finished him off by strangling him to death, and his body was discarded behind a Los Angeles business. On April 10th, William was discharged from parole. He encountered 16-year-old Bellflower youth Stephen John Wood walking to school. Wood's older brother had introduced him to William, so he willingly entered William's van. His hog-tied body would be discarded in a Long Beach alleyway close to the Pacific Coast Highway. William allegedly waited until dusk to discard him, and Wood's autopsy revealed that he had been unalived by strangulation. On April 29th, William encountered 19-year-old Darren Kendrick at his workplace in Stanton. William lured Kendrick into the van on the pretext of selling him drugs. William then drove to Vernon Butts' apartment in Lakewood. There he asked Kendrick whether he was gay. Kendrick attempted to flee, but William and Vernon bound him. Again, the two men began to essay and torture the man, and William raised the volume of the sound system to cover up Kendrick's screams. They also held Kendrick's mouth open while William poured chloric hydrate down his throat, causing him to sustain chemical burns. Kendrick fought his attackers but stopped before complaining of dizziness. William then strangled him, and Vernon drove an ice pick into his ear, fatally wounding his cervical spinal cord. His body was discarded behind a warehouse close to the Artesia Freeway. On May 12th, William abducted and murdered an acquaintance of his. He later stated that he decided to unalive them when he had woken up that morning, because he was, quote-unquote, tired of having him around. The body of 17-year-old Lawrence Sharp was discarded behind a Westminster gas station. His body was found on the 18th, and his autopsy revealed that he had been bound, sodomized, beaten, and strangled, much like many other young boys. On May 19th, William asked Vernon to accompany him on another abduction. However, Vernon reportedly refused. So, unassisted, William abducted 14-year-old Southgate boy Sean King in Downey. King was strangled to death before his body was discarded. William then visited Vernon's apartment and bragged to him about the unaliving. By early 1980, William's murders were receiving considerable media attention, and leading gay rights activists had offered a reward totaling $50,000 for information leading to the conviction of the suspects. Having by this stage determined a definitive link by many of the recent murders, investigators from this jurisdiction where the victims had been abducted began sharing information, and 6 officers formed a task force dedicated to finding the killer. By May, William Paw had been arrested for auto theft. On May 28th, he overheard the details of an ongoing murder investigation on the local radio broadcast and confided to a counselor that he knew the perpetrator's modus operandi, which was described to him by William 2 months prior. The counselor reported Paw's suspicion to the police, who in return relayed a confidential tip to the Los Angeles Police Department. Police started interviewing Paw the very next day, although he did withhold the fact that he had accompanied William on one of his murders. The information that he provided led police to decide that Bonin might be the Freeway Killer. That very same day, William invited 18-year-old homeless drifter James Michael Monroe, whom he had encountered while cruising for young male prostitutes, to move into his family's home in exchange for intimacy. Monroe was a runaway from St. Clair, Michigan, who had been evicted by his family's home in early 1980. Monroe had gone to California to meet a friend, but became homeless after he was robbed of money that he had earned as a male prostitute in Hollywood. While Monroe lived with William, he described him as a pretty nice guy and really normal. The two began a consensual relationship with each other, and then on June 1st, William informed Monroe that he wanted them both to abduct, essay, and murder a hitchhiker together. While all of this was going on, a police investigation into William's background revealed his extensive history of convictions for essay on teenage boys. As a result, police assigned a surveillance team to monitor what he was doing during the day and night. The surveillance didn't quite start until 1 hour after William and Monroe would take their first victim together. The two men encountered Stephen J. Wells on El Segundo Boulevard. The two men enticed him into the van, and according to the pair, upon learning Wells was bisexual, they had consensual intimacy in the van before persuading him to go to his parents' house. There, they continued to have intimacy, and later, William paid Wells $200 to allow himself to be bound with a clothesline. But Wells became suspicious of their intentions and frantic, so the two then gagged and beat him in the hallway. Wells pleaded for his life, but William strangled him to death. The two men drove to Vernon Butt's house just to show him the body and then ask where they should dispose of the man that they just unalived. Vernon suggested an abandoned gas station not too far away, and that's where they disposed of the body, where he was found 5 hours later. Later that night, after Monroe and William returned home, William had told Monroe that he better stay quiet about the unaliving of the boy earlier, otherwise he would also be unalived. After 9 days of uneventful surveillance on June 11th, police observed William driving through Hollywood, unsuccessfully attempting to lure 5 separate boys into his van, before succeeding in getting one in the van. The police followed William until he parked at a service station close to Hollywood Freeway, then discreetly approached the vehicle. Upon hearing screams and banging sounds coming from inside the van, officers forced their way inside. They discovered William sexually assaulting 17-year-old Orange County runaway Harold Eugene Tate, whom he had handcuffed and bound. William Bonin was originally charged with the assault of a minor and held on suspicion of Miranda's murder. He was detained in lieu of a $250,000 bond. The next day, after William was arrested, Monroe stole William's car and fled back to Michigan, where he temporarily was until he was arrested. Forensic teams found a ton of forensic evidence inside William's van. They found various restraining devices, knives, a tire iron. Also, they noted the removed door handles inside the van so that way people could not get out once they were in. And they also found traces of bloodstains. Inside the glove box, they discovered a scrapbook of newspaper clippings related to the murders. Initially, William pleaded his innocence to all of the murders and assaults, but after police read a letter from Sean King's mother imploring him to reveal the location of her son's body, William Bonin decided to start confessing, but it wasn't because he felt bad or it was to ease Sean King's mother's pain, but because he wanted a burger on the way to find the body. Just a real stand-up guy. All of William's accomplices would be arrested, but they definitely varied in the punishments that they received. Vernon Butts hanged himself while in his cell, so unfortunately he did not face any consequences for his actions. Both James Monroe and Gregory Miley would face life in prison, but they did not receive the death penalty in exchange for testifying against William. Finally, William Paw would only face 6 years for involuntary manslaughter. William Bonin would receive the death penalty, and on February 23rd, 1996, he would be executed by lethal injection, and he was the first person in California to receive this kind of death penalty. William would be pronounced dead at 12:13 a.m. His last meal would be 2 large sausage and pepperoni pizzas, 3 pints of coffee ice cream, and 3 6-packs of Coca-Cola. He did not show any remorse for the actions that he committed against any of the boys. The only thing that he said he regretted was getting caught. I did have to make some other things in addition to his last meal just because it was such a long episode and I didn't want to leave a ton of information out, so hopefully that's okay with you guys. For this last meal, I would probably give it a 5 out of 10. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's terrible either. There's nothing wrong with pizza and ice cream. I'm not a huge fan of coffee ice cream. I think it's okay. But there's nothing wrong with the pizza. In total, William Bonin was suspected, at least he admitted, to killing 21 boys and young men, and I think that that's insane. Obviously, he did not face justice for all of them. They had most of them. They had reasonable cause and evidence, but there were some where there just wasn't enough evidence. Not that it would amount to a different outcome since he did get the death penalty, but I always feel a little bit sad for the victims who didn't technically get justice for what happened to them. This case was so draining, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. There was just so much craziness, and I didn't want to skip over any of the victims because they deserve to have their story heard, but it was very repetitive in the things that he did to them. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, all the things, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.